At my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law smashed my face into the hot mashed potatoes. "Taste the food, old witch," she said. That's when someone among the guests turned pale with terror and screamed, "She's a billionaire." That night, I did something that. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into that reception hall. The way conversations stopped mid-sentence, how heads turned and whispers followed me like shadows. But I was so focused on my son Felix, so desperate to make this day perfect despite everything, that I ignored every warning sign. The wedding had been beautiful. Felix looked handsome in his black tuxedo, standing at the altar with tears in his eyes as Raya walked down the aisle in her flowing white dress. For a moment, watching them exchange vows, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Maybe this marriage would heal the distance between my son and me. Maybe Raya would be the bridge I'd been searching for. I was so wrong. The reception was held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over round tables draped in ivory linens. I'd offered to help pay for the venue, but Raya had insisted they handle everything themselves. "We want to do this our way, Mrs. Morrison," she'd said with that sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes. I found my assigned seat at table 12 near the back. Not at the family table where Felix's new in-laws sat laughing and toasting. Not even close to the head table where the bride and groom would sit. Table 12, with distant cousins I barely knew, and family friends who seemed uncomfortable making conversation with me. The evening dragged on with speeches and dancing. I watched Felix spin Raya across the dance floor, her laughter ringing out above the music. He looked so happy, so completely absorbed in his new wife. When was the last time he'd looked at me like that? When was the last time he'd looked at me at all with anything other than polite tolerance? Dinner was served around 8 o'clock. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, and garlic mashed potatoes. I picked at my food, my appetite gone. The woman next to me, Felix's great-aunt Margaret, kept shooting me sympathetic glances. "You must be so proud," she whispered, leaning close enough that I could smell her floral perfume. "I am," I replied, forcing a smile. "Felix deserves happiness." That's when I noticed Raya making her way toward our table. She moved with purpose, her jaw set in a way that made my stomach clench. Felix was nowhere to be seen, probably in the bathroom or outside getting air. "Mrs. Morrison," Raya said when she reached my chair. Her voice was loud enough to carry to nearby tables. "I wanted to personally thank you for everything you've done for Felix." Something in her tone made me tense. "Of course, dear. He's my son. Yes, he is." Her smile was sharp now, predatory. "And you've been such a dedicated mother, working all those night shifts, missing his school plays, his baseball games. Always so busy." The conversations around us had stopped completely. I could feel eyes on us, the weight of sudden attention. "Raya, perhaps we could talk about this later." "Oh no, I think now is perfect." She moved closer, and I caught a whiff of alcohol on her breath. "You see, Felix told me all about his childhood, how you were never there, how he spent most nights alone while you were off doing whatever it was you did." My cheeks burned. "I was working to support us. After his father died, you abandoned him." Her voice rose another notch. "You chose work over your own child, and now you want to play grandmother to our future children?" The words hit me like physical blows. Around us, the silence was deafening. I could see people pulling out their phones, recording this public humiliation. "Raya, please what?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Please pretend you were a good mother? Please act like Felix doesn't still wake up sometimes calling for a mommy who was never there?" I tried to stand, to escape this nightmare, but Raya placed a firm hand on my shoulder, pushing me back down. That's when I saw the plate of mashed potatoes in her other hand. "You know what, Mrs. Morrison? Since you're so interested in family dinners now, why don't you really taste the food?" Before I could react, before anyone could stop her, Raya shoved the plate toward my face. The hot mashed potatoes hit me square in the cheek and mouth, burning my skin. The force of it knocked me sideways in my chair, and I felt the scalding mixture slide down my neck and onto my dress. "Taste the food, you old hag," she screamed, her mask of civility completely gone. Taste what a real family meal feels like. The pain was immediate and intense, not just from the heat of the potatoes, but from the complete shock of what had just happened. I sat there, stunned, food dripping from my face and hair, unable to process that this was really happening. The ballroom erupted. People gasped. Chairs scraped against the floor as guests stood to get a better view. Someone was shouting for napkins. Another person was calling for hotel security. But through it all, I heard one voice above the chaos. A man I didn't recognize, standing near the bar with his mouth hanging open. "Oh my God," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Do you people have any idea who you just attacked? That's Della Morrison. She's worth over $3 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room turned to me, sitting there covered in mashed potatoes, my carefully styled hair ruined, my dignity shattered. $3 billion. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Raya's face went white. Her hand, still holding the empty plate, began to tremble. Around us, I could see the gears turning in people's minds, recalculating everything they thought they knew about the modest woman in the simple blue dress. I finally managed to stand, potato mixture still sliding down my face. Without a word, I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the absolute silence. No one tried to stop me, no one said a word, but as I reached the door, I heard Felix's voice behind me, confused and desperate. Mom, wait! What's he talking about? What $3 billion? I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to see the look in my son's eyes. The questions, the accusations, the realization that his mother had been lying to him his entire life. That night, sitting in my small apartment washing mashed potatoes out of my hair, I made a decision that would change everything. They wanted to know about the $3 billion. They were about to find out exactly what Della Morrison was capable of when pushed too far. 3 days passed before Felix called. 3 days of sitting in my small apartment, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. When it finally did, his voice was different, colder, more distant than I'd ever heard it. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. No greeting, no asking how I was after what happened at his wedding. "Raya wants to apologize." Of course she did. Now that she knew who I really was, suddenly she wanted to apologize. "I'll come to your place," I said quietly. "No." His response was quick, sharp. "Neutral ground. That cafe on 5th Street. 1 hour." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, feeling the familiar ache in my chest that had become my constant companion over the years. This was how Felix talked to business associates, not his mother. But then again, Felix had never really known his mother. Not the real one. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a corner table where we could have privacy. The autumn rain drummed against the windows, matching my mood perfectly. When Felix walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The joy from his wedding day was gone, replaced by something harder, more suspicious. Raya wasn't with him. "Where's your wife?" I asked as he sat down across from me. "She's processing everything." He ordered coffee from the waitress, then fixed me with a stare I'd never seen before. "Is it true, Mom? Are you really worth billions?" The question hung between us like a landmine. I'd practiced this conversation in my head dozens of times over the years, but now that it was happening, I felt unprepared. "Yes," I said simply. Felix's jaw tightened. "How?" "Where to begin? How do you explain 30 years of careful planning, of sacrifices your child never knew you made, of a life lived in shadows to protect the one person who mattered most? It started after your father died," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Do you remember those months right after the funeral? How I was working all the time?" "I remember being alone," he said, and the bitterness in his voice cut deep. "You were 6 years old. Your father left us with nothing but debt and an insurance policy that barely covered the funeral expenses. I had a choice: find a way to survive or watch us lose everything. I took a sip of my coffee, buying time, remembering those dark early days. I started cleaning office buildings at night. That's where I met Harold Weinstein. He owned a small real estate company that was struggling. He used to work late, and we'd talk while I cleaned his office. Felix was listening now, his expression unreadable. Harold saw something in me. He taught me about real estate, about investment opportunities. When he retired 5 years later, he sold me his company for almost nothing, said I reminded him of his daughter. That was only part of the truth, of course. Harold had seen more than potential in me. He'd seen desperation, intelligence, and a work ethic that bordered on obsession. He'd also seen a woman who would do anything to secure her child's future. I was good at it, Felix. Better than good. I could spot undervalued properties, negotiate deals that others couldn't see. Within 10 years, I'd expanded from commercial real estate to residential developments, then to international investments. So you just forgot to mention this? His voice was rising now, drawing glances from other customers. You let me think we were poor? You let me go to college on scholarships when you could have paid for Harvard? This was the heart of it, the wound that had been festering for decades. I wanted you to have your own life, I said, leaning forward. Free from gold diggers, from people who would only see you as a meal ticket. I wanted you to find love that was real, not someone attracted to your money. Felix laughed, but there was no humor in it. Like Raya? The irony wasn't lost on either of us. In trying to protect him from fortune hunters, I'd made him vulnerable to a different kind of predator. You have no idea what growing up rich does to a child, I continued. I've seen it destroy families, turn children into entitled monsters who never learn the value of work or genuine relationships. So instead you made me feel worthless, he said quietly. Do you know what it was like, Mom? Watching other kids get picked up by their parents while you were always working? Missing every school play, every parent-teacher conference? I thought you didn't care. My heart broke a little more with each word. I cared. I cared so much that I worked myself to exhaustion to build something for you. Every late night, every missed dinner, every time I chose work over being with you. It was all for you. No, Felix shook his head. It was for your guilt, your need to prove something. You could have found a balance, but you chose the money. He was wrong, but I couldn't tell him the whole truth. Not yet. He didn't know about the lawyers I'd hired to protect us from his father's family, who'd tried to claim he wasn't really their son. He didn't know about the private security I'd paid for during those early years when his father's business associates came looking for money they claimed he owed. He didn't know about the trust fund I'd set up that would make him independently wealthy on his 40th birthday, regardless of what happened to my estate. I know you're angry, I said instead. And you have every right to be. I made mistakes, Felix, but everything I did was to protect you. Protect me from what? Having a mother who was present? The words stung because they held truth. I had been absent, physically and emotionally. The empire I'd built had consumed me, driven by a terror that if I ever slowed down, if I ever let my guard down, something terrible would happen to the only family I had left. From people like Raya, I said quietly. Felix's face flushed red. Don't you dare. Raya loves me. Raya attacked me at your wedding reception, I reminded him. In front of 200 people? She humiliated me publicly? Is that what love looks like to you? She was protecting me from someone she thought was a selfish, absent mother, and maybe she was right. The words hit their mark. I sat back in my chair, feeling suddenly very old and very tired. Maybe she was, I agreed. But that doesn't change what she did, or what she's planning to do now that she knows about the money. Felix's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been doubt, but then his jaw set again, and I knew I'd lost this round. I need time to process this, he said, standing up. All of it. Felix, wait. No, Mom. For 30 years you've been lying to me. For 30 years you've let me believe we struggled when you were sitting on billions. I need to figure out what else you've been hiding. He walked away without looking back, leaving me alone at the table with my cold coffee and the weight of 3 decades of secrets. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet, and I watched the ice form on the windows while my mind raced. Felix was angry, confused, and hurt. I understood that, But Raya was something else entirely. The way she'd looked at me before that attack, the calculated cruelty of her words, the public nature of the humiliation, none of that was spontaneous. She'd planned it, which meant she'd known about my money before that guest blurted it out. The question was, how long had she known? And more importantly, what was she planning to do with that knowledge now? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Marcus Chen had been my head of security for 15 years. A former FBI agent who specialized in protecting high-net-worth individuals from threats both external and internal. "Marcus," I said when he answered, "I need you to run a complete background check on someone, and I need it done quietly. Because if Raya thought she could humiliate me and then waltz back into my life now that she knew I was wealthy, she was about to learn exactly what Della Morrison did to people who threatened her family." Marcus Chen's report arrived on my desk exactly 72 hours after I'd requested it. 3 manila folders, each one thicker than I'd expected. As I opened the first one, my coffee grew cold while I read about the woman my son had married. Raya Elizabeth Novak, born in Cleveland, Ohio, 28 years old, dropped out of college 3 times. No steady employment history in the past 5 years. What she did have was a pattern. The photographs were what stopped me cold. Marcus had managed to obtain pictures from social media accounts Raya had deleted, but nothing truly disappears from the internet when you know where to look. There she was at charity galas in Miami, always on the arm of different men, designer dresses, expensive jewelry, first-class vacation photos, all with men who were significantly older and, according to Marcus's notes, significantly wealthier than their ages might suggest. David Rothschild, age 42, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, dated Raya for 8 months before she disappeared with $20,000 from his personal checking account. No charges were filed. Michael Torres, age 39, owner of 3 successful restaurants in Chicago. Their engagement lasted 6 months before he discovered she'd been using his credit cards to finance a lifestyle he'd never authorized. Again, no legal action taken. Jonathan Wright, age 35, tech entrepreneur. Their relationship ended abruptly when his accountant noticed unusual transactions from accounts Raya had access to. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Raya was a professional. This wasn't some young woman who'd fallen in love with my son and discovered his family had money. This was someone who'd targeted Felix specifically, studied him, planned her approach. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed to call Felix immediately, show him these files, make him understand what he'd married. But before I could dial, my doorbell rang. Felix stood in my hallway, and for a moment my heart leaped with hope. Maybe he'd come to apologize, to bridge the gap between us. Then I saw Raya behind him, and that hope died. "Mom," Felix said, his voice carefully neutral, "we need to talk." I stepped aside to let them in, my mind racing. The files were still spread across my dining room table, but they'd have to pass through the living room first. I quickly closed the folders and slipped them under a magazine. "I'm glad you came," I said, though looking at Raya made my skin crawl. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, makeup minimal. The picture of wounded innocence. "Please, sit down." Raya perched on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid to get comfortable. Felix remained standing, his posture rigid. "Raya has something she wants to say," he announced. I looked at her, waiting. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed no actual tears. "Mrs. Morrison," she began, her voice soft and trembling, "I owe you the deepest apology. What I did at the wedding. There's no excuse for it." I was emotional, overwhelmed, and I let my feelings about Felix's childhood cloud my judgment. It was a good performance. If I hadn't seen those files, if I didn't know what she really was, I might have believed her. "I see," I said carefully. "The truth is," Raya continued, glancing at Felix before looking back at me, "I was so protective of Felix because I know how much he struggled with feeling abandoned. When I thought you were just, well, when I didn't understand your situation, I reacted badly." "My situation?" Felix shifted uncomfortably. "She means when we thought you were struggling financially, before we knew about everything." "Everything?" I repeated. "You mean my money, Your wealth, Raya corrected gently. Felix told me about your real estate empire. I had no idea, Mrs. Morrison, if I had known. What difference would it have made? I asked, genuinely curious about how she'd spin this. Well, I would have understood why you had to work so much when Felix was young. Building a business empire requires sacrifice. I see that now. She reached over and took Felix's hand. We both do. I watched my son's face as she spoke. He was buying every word. The doubt I'd seen at the cafe was gone, replaced by relief. He wanted to believe this narrative, wanted to think his wife's attack had been motivated by protective love rather than cruel calculation. That's very understanding of you, I said. Both of you. Raya smiled, and for just a moment I saw something cold flash in her eyes. Family is so important, isn't it? Now that we know the truth about your success, I hope we can start fresh. Maybe you could tell us more about your business? Felix and I would love to learn. There it was, the real reason for this visit. She wanted information about my assets, my investments, my estate planning. She was already calculating, already planning. I'd be happy to share, I lied smoothly. Perhaps you could tell me more about yourself first, Raya. Your family, your background. I realize I know so little about the woman my son married. The smile faltered slightly. Oh, there's not much to tell. I grew up in Ohio, small-town girl. My parents passed away a few years ago. No siblings. Felix is really all the family I have now. Every word was carefully chosen to paint her as vulnerable, alone, deserving of protection and support. But I knew better now. Her parents were alive and well, living in a modest suburb of Cleveland. She had 2 brothers and a sister, all of whom had cut contact with her years ago for reasons Marcus was still investigating. How tragic, I said, losing your parents so young. It was difficult, she agreed, dabbing at those non-existent tears again. But it taught me how precious family is, how important it is to hold on to the people you love. Felix squeezed her hand, and I saw the way he looked at her, protective, adoring, completely blind to what was happening right in front of him. Actually, Raya continued, Felix and I have been talking about the future, about children, about providing for them. It's wonderful to know they'll have such a successful grandmother. My blood turned to ice. Children. She was already planning her next move, thinking about grandchildren who would tie her permanently to my family and my fortune. Children are a blessing, I managed to say. We're trying, Felix added, and the openness in his voice broke my heart. We want to start a family right away. How wonderful, I said, though inside I was screaming. I needed them gone. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to save my son from this trap he'd willingly walked into. Actually, I said, standing up, I have a conference call with my lawyers in a few minutes about updating my estate planning. Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time. Raya's eyes sharpened at the mention of estate planning, though she tried to hide it. Of course, we don't want to keep you from important business. As they gathered their things to leave, Raya paused at the door. Mrs. Morrison? I just want you to know how much it means to Felix that we're reconciling. He's been so hurt by the distance between you two. I think knowing the truth about why you worked so hard will help him heal. I hope so, I said. After they left, I retrieved Marcus's files and spread them out again, but this time, I focused on the timeline. When had Raya first contacted Felix? According to the report, they'd met at a coffee shop near his office 18 months ago. She'd accidentally spilled her drink on him. But Felix worked for Morrison Holdings. Not the main office. I'd kept our family connection quiet there too, but a subsidiary that managed some of my smaller real estate investments. Anyone researching my business empire would eventually find that connection. She'd known from the beginning. I picked up my phone and called Marcus again. I need surveillance, I said when he answered. 24-hour coverage on my son and his wife. I want to know where they go, who they meet with, what they discuss. And Marcus? I want to know about any legal consultations they might seek. Estate lawyers? He asked. Among others. I stared at the photographs of Raya with her previous marks. I also need you to contact these men. the ones from her past. I want to know exactly what she did to them and why they didn't press charges. Because if Raya thought she could charm her way into my fortune by playing the role of devoted wife and future mother, she was about to learn that I hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by being naive. The war for my son's future was just beginning, and I intended to win. But as I looked at the photos of Felix and Raya leaving my building, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, I realized that winning might cost me the only thing I'd ever truly cared about. My relationship with my son might not survive this battle, but if I lost it, at least I'd know I'd saved him from something worse. Marcus's surveillance reports arrived every morning like clockwork, and each one made my blood run colder. Raya wasn't wasting any time. 2 days after their visit to my apartment, she'd convinced Felix to make an appointment with Harrison and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious estate planning firms, the same firm that had been trying to poach my business for years. 3 days after that, she'd had lunch with someone Marcus identified as Dr. Patricia Kellerman, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations for wealthy elderly clients. By the end of the first week, I knew exactly what Raya was planning. She wasn't just after my money, she was preparing to have me declared mentally incompetent. Once Felix had power of attorney, she'd control him completely, and through him, everything I'd built. It was brilliant in its own sociopathic way, and it might have worked if I hadn't spent 30 years learning how to outmaneuver people who underestimated me. I was sitting in my study, reviewing the latest surveillance photos, when my housekeeper Maria knocked on the door. "Mrs. Morrison, your son is here. He says it's urgent." I quickly slipped the photos into a drawer and composed myself. "Send him in, please." Felix entered alone, which surprised me. For the past week, Raya had been attached to his side like a shadow. He looked tired, older somehow, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, taking the chair across from my desk. "About your health." Here it was, the opening move. "My health is fine, Felix," I said calmly. "Why do you ask?" "Raya's been worried about you. She thinks you might be struggling with some memory issues." I almost laughed. Of course she did. What kind of memory issues? Felix shifted uncomfortably. "She mentioned that when you two talked last week, you seemed confused about some things, mixed up dates, forgot conversations you'd had, none of which had happened, but I could see how easily Raya could convince my son it had. He wanted to believe her about everything else. Why not this?" "I see," I said. "And what does Raya think I should do about these supposed memory issues?" "She thinks you should see a doctor, get evaluated, maybe consider getting some help managing your affairs." "My affairs are perfectly well managed, Felix." "Are they?" He leaned forward, and I saw genuine concern in his eyes. "Mom, you're 73 years old, sitting on billions of dollars, and you live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. That's not normal." It was exactly the argument I'd expected. Paint my modest lifestyle as evidence of declining mental capacity rather than a deliberate choice to live quietly. "I live the way I choose to live," I said. "The same way I've lived for 20 years. "But that's just it," Felix said, his voice rising slightly. 20 years ago, I thought we were poor. Now I find out you've been wealthy this whole time. How do I know what else you've been hiding? How do I know you're making good decisions about anything?" I studied my son's face, seeing the genuine confusion and worry there. Raya was good. She'd planted seeds of doubt that were growing exactly as she'd planned. "What would make you feel better?" I asked. "Just see a doctor, Mom. Get a clean bill of health. Then we can all stop worrying." "All?" "Raya and me. We just want to make sure you're okay." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "I suppose that would be reasonable. Do you have someone in mind?" Felix relaxed slightly. "Actually, Raya found someone. Dr. Kellerman. She specializes in seniors, has a great reputation." Of course she had. The same Dr. Kellerman who'd had lunch with Raya the week before. The one who'd probably already been briefed on what diagnosis would be most helpful for my daughter-in-law's plans. "I'd prefer to choose my own doctor," I said. Felix's jaw tightened. "Mom, you can't just keep refusing help. This is about your safety, your well-being." "And my money?" The words hung in the air between us. Felix flushed red, but didn't deny it. This isn't about money, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is about family, about making sure you're protected. Protected from whom? From yourself. From people who might take advantage of you. He was standing now, pacing in front of my desk. Do you have any idea how vulnerable you are? How many people would love to get their hands on your fortune? Yes, I said quietly. I do. Something in my tone made him pause. He looked at me more carefully, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the intelligent boy he'd once been. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've been protecting myself and my assets for 30 years, Felix. It means I know exactly who poses a threat to my well-being, and it's not strangers. Then who? I met his eyes steadily. Ask yourself who benefits most if I'm declared incompetent. Who gains control of my assets if something happens to me? Who suggested the doctor? Who's pushing for the evaluation? Who's been so concerned about my mental state since learning about my wealth? Felix went very still. You're talking about my wife. I'm talking about patterns, Felix. About people who target wealthy individuals for financial exploitation. That's insane, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Raya loves me. She married me before she knew about the money. Did she? The question hit its mark. I saw doubt flicker in his eyes again, stronger this time. What are you saying? I'm saying you might want to ask yourself how a woman with no job and no family savings afforded the designer dress she wore to your wedding. How she's been able to maintain the lifestyle she's been living for the past 2 years. Where the money comes from. Felix was quiet for a long moment, processing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, but even if it were, she's my wife now. We're trying to have children. You can't just what? Protect yourself? Protect your future children from someone who sees them as meal tickets? You don't know her like I do. You're right. I know her better. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out one of Marcus's folders. Not the full report. Felix wasn't ready for that yet, but some of the more damning evidence. The photos of Raya with her previous marks. The documentation of her pattern. What is this? Felix asked, taking the folder with trembling hands. The truth about the woman you married. I watched his face as he flipped through the pages, watched the color drain from his cheeks, saw his hands start to shake. When he got to the photographs, he actually gasped. Where did you get these? I had her investigated, the same way I investigate any potential threat to my family. You had my wife investigated! His voice was rising again, but now it was shock rather than anger. I had a stranger who attacked me at my son's wedding investigated, I corrected. A stranger who suddenly became very interested in reconciliation once she learned about my wealth. Felix sank back into his chair, still staring at the photos. These men, who are they? Her previous targets, all wealthy, all significantly older than their wives' usual demographic, all left poorer after their relationships with your wife ended. This can't be real. This has to be some kind of mistake. I pulled out my phone and played an audio file. Marcus had been thorough in his investigation, including interviews with Raya's previous victims. She was perfect at first, said the voice of David Rothschild. Loving, attentive, made me feel like the most important man in the world. But looking back, I can see how calculated it all was. Every gesture, every word, every emotion was designed to make me trust her completely. Felix's face crumpled as he listened. When the recording ended, he looked at me with eyes full of pain. How long have you known? Since the day after you came here with her. I suspected something was wrong from the moment she attacked me, but I needed proof. And you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me? Or would you have accused me of trying to destroy your marriage out of jealousy? He was quiet, because we both knew the answer. What am I supposed to do now? He asked finally. That depends. Do you want to save your marriage or save yourself? I want to save both. That's not possible, Felix. Not with someone like Raya. People like her don't change. They just get better at hiding what they are. He stood up abruptly, still clutching the folder. I need time to think. I need to process this. Time is something you may not have much of, I warned. She's already made appointments with lawyers and doctors. Whatever she's planning, it's moving forward quickly. I know. I thought I finally had a family. Someone who loved me. The pain in his voice broke my heart. You do have family, Felix. You have me. Do I? Because for 30 years you've been lying to me about who you are. I've been protecting you. There's a difference. Is there? He moved toward the door, then paused. I don't know who to trust anymore, Mom. I don't know what's real. After he left, I sat in my study for a long time, staring at the evidence spread across my desk. I'd planted the seeds of doubt, but I needed to do more. Raya wouldn't give up easily, and Felix was still vulnerable to her manipulation. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. I need you to accelerate the investigation, I said, and I need you to arrange a meeting with someone from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. If Raya has been doing this to multiple victims, there might be grounds for federal charges. You want to have your son's wife arrested? I want to save my son before it's too late. Because sometimes protecting the people you love means making choices they'll never forgive you for. And sometimes being a mother means being willing to be the villain in your child's story, as long as they survive to have a story at all. 2 weeks passed without a word from Felix. 2 weeks of watching Marcus's surveillance reports, seeing my son grow more distant and hollow-eyed while Raya increased her pressure. She'd moved them into a luxury apartment downtown, paid for with what money, I wondered, and had begun introducing Felix to financial advisors who specialized in managing family wealth. The trap was closing around him, and he either couldn't see it or didn't want to. That's when I decided to force the issue. I called Felix on a Thursday afternoon, my voice carefully modulated to sound slightly confused, a little frail. Felix, it's your mother. I was wondering, could you and Raya come for dinner on Saturday? I feel like we need to clear the air between us. There was a long pause. Mom, are you okay? You sound... I'm fine, dear. Just tired. This whole situation has been weighing on me. I think Raya was right. Maybe I do need to start making some changes, planning for the future. I could practically hear his relief through the phone. Of course we'll come. What time? 7 o'clock. And Felix? I'd like to discuss my estate planning with both of you. I think it's time I started trusting family to help me make important decisions. After I hung up, I called Marcus. Saturday night. I need full audio and video surveillance of my apartment. Hidden cameras, directional microphones, everything. What are you planning? I'm going to let Raya hang herself with her own rope. Saturday evening arrived gray and drizzling. I'd spent the day preparing, not just the dinner, but the performance I was about to give. I dressed in clothes that were slightly too big for me, did my makeup carelessly, left my hair a little disheveled. I needed to look like a woman whose mental faculties were declining. Felix and Raya arrived exactly on time. Felix looked nervous, constantly glancing between his wife and me as if expecting an explosion. Raya, on the other hand, looked triumphant. She was dressed elegantly but conservatively, playing the part of the concerned daughter-in-law. Mrs. Morrison, she said, taking my hands in hers as she air-kissed my cheeks. You look tired? Are you feeling all right? Oh, you know how it is at my age, I said, letting my voice quaver slightly. Some days are better than others. Thank you both for coming. It means so much to have family around. Dinner was pot roast, Felix's favorite from childhood, though I'd deliberately overseasoned it and let the vegetables get a bit mushy. Little details that would support the narrative of declining capabilities. This is delicious, Mom, Felix said loyally, though I could see him struggling with the salty gravy. Is it? I wasn't sure about the seasoning. I seem to have trouble with recipes lately. Yesterday I put sugar in my coffee 3 times and couldn't remember doing it. Raya's eyes lit up with interest. That must be frustrating. Have you considered getting some help? Maybe someone to assist with cooking and household management? I don't know, I said, pushing food around my plate uncertainly. I've always been so independent, but lately I feel so confused about things. Finances especially. All those numbers and accounts. It's overwhelming. Felix and Raya exchanged a glance. The hook was baited. Maybe we could help, Raya suggested gently. Felix is so good with financial matters, aren't you, honey? Felix nodded, though he looked uncomfortable. If you want, Mom, I could take a look at your portfolio, just to make sure everything's in order. Would you? That would be such a relief. I reached across the table and patted his hand. You know, I've been thinking about what you said before. About seeing a doctor. About getting my affairs in order. Really? Raya leaned forward, unable to hide her eagerness. I scheduled an appointment with that doctor you recommended, Dr. Kellerman. And I spoke with my lawyer about updating my will. That's wonderful news, Raya said, her voice warm with false concern. What kind of changes are you considering? Here was the moment I'd been building toward. I let my face crumple slightly, as if I were about to cry. I'm so ashamed, I whispered. All these years I've been such a terrible mother to Felix. Working all the time, missing everything important. I don't deserve to call myself his mother. Mom, don't say that, Felix protested, but I could see Raya's mind racing. No, it's true. And now, at the end of my life, I want to make it right. I want to make sure you're taken care of. You and Raya and your future children. What are you saying? Felix asked. I took a shaky breath. I'm saying I want to transfer most of my assets to you now, while I'm still alive to see you enjoy them. Dr. Kellerman explained that it's common for people my age to start having trouble managing complex financial decisions. Better to hand things over while I can still make that choice myself. Raya couldn't contain herself any longer. That's very wise, Mrs. Morrison. So many elderly people wait too long, and then their families have to make difficult decisions for them. Exactly, I agreed. Much better this way. I was thinking of transferring about 60% of my liquid assets immediately. Maybe setting up a trust with Felix as the primary beneficiary and you as co-trustee, Raya. Felix looked stunned. Mom, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. Money I should have been sharing with you all along, I said, dabbing at my eyes with a napkin. I was so selfish, so focused on building my empire that I forgot what really mattered. Family. Raya was practically glowing. This is such a generous gesture, and so practical. Felix, your mother is showing real wisdom here. I suppose, Felix said slowly. But Mom, are you sure? That's a huge decision. I'm sure, I said firmly. In fact, I'd like to get the paperwork started as soon as possible. Maybe this week? I have an appointment with Dr. Kellerman on Tuesday for the competency evaluation, and I'd like to have everything signed before then. Why before? Felix asked. I let my voice get small and frightened. In case she finds something wrong with me. If there are problems with my memory or judgment, I want to know that I made this decision while I was still myself. Raya reached over and squeezed my hand. That's very thoughtful, Mrs. Morrison. Very responsible. There's just one thing, I added, as if it had just occurred to me. My lawyer insists on recording our conversation about the transfer, legal protection, he says, to prove that I'm making this decision freely and with full understanding of what I'm doing. For just a moment, Raya's mask slipped. I saw calculation in her eyes, then caution, but greed won out. Of course, she said smoothly. Complete transparency is always best in these situations. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of planning. Raya suggested lawyers who could expedite the process. She mentioned financial advisors who could help manage the transition. She even brought up the possibility of Felix taking a more active role in my business operations. As they prepared to leave, Raya hugged me warmly. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know how much this means to Felix, to both of us. You're giving us such a wonderful gift. It's the least I can do, I said. After all the years I lost with my son, Felix kissed my cheek goodbye, and I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart. Hope. He genuinely believed this was his mother trying to make amends, trying to rebuild their relationship through generosity. He had no idea he was about to witness his wife's complete destruction. After they left, I sat in my apartment for exactly 1 hour. Then I called Marcus. Did you get everything? Crystal clear video and audio. She took the bait completely. Good. Now I need you to contact FBI agent Sarah Chen. I know. Different Chen, no relation. Tell her I have evidence of an ongoing scheme to defraud an elderly person. Tell her I have surveillance footage of the perpetrator discussing specific plans to manipulate a competency evaluation and gain control of assets through coercion. You're really going through with this? I thought about Felix's hopeful face, about the grandchildren Raya was planning to use as emotional leverage, about the decades of careful planning she was trying to unravel. She made one mistake, I said. She assumed that because I'm 73 and live modestly, I must be weak. She confused appearance with reality. And Felix? That was the question that had been haunting me. My son would hate me for this. He might never forgive me. But he would be free. Felix will understand eventually. And if he doesn't, well, at least he'll be alive and financially secure to hate me. Because sometimes being a mother means saving your children from themselves, even when they can't see the danger, even when they'll never thank you for it. Tuesday morning, Dr. Kellerman would find herself explaining to federal agents why she'd agreed to provide a predetermined diagnosis. Raya would discover that elderly victims aren't always as helpless as they appear, and Felix would learn that his mother's greatest act of love wasn't giving him money. It was taking away the woman who would have destroyed him. The game was almost over. I just had to survive the final move. The call came at 6 in the morning on Tuesday. Felix's voice was raw, shaken, barely recognizable. "Mom? They arrested Raya." I was already dressed, already waiting. I'd been awake since 4, knowing this moment would come. "What happened?" I asked, though I knew exactly what had happened. The FBI had moved faster than I'd expected. Federal agents came to our apartment at 5 a.m. They had a warrant. They said she's being charged with elder fraud, conspiracy, and something about crossing state lines to commit financial crimes. His voice broke. "Mom, they showed me things. Documents, recordings, evidence of other people she's done this to." "Where are you now?" "At the police station. They wanted to question me, but my lawyer says I'm not a suspect, just a victim." The word came out bitter, self-loathing. "Come home, Felix. Come to my apartment. I don't know if I can face you right now." "Come anyway." 2 hours later, my son stood in my doorway looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes red from crying. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Sit down, sweetheart." "How long?" "Since the day after your wedding." He sank into my sofa, his head in his hands. "You've known for weeks that my wife was a criminal, and you didn't tell me?" "I tried to tell you. You wouldn't listen." "You could have tried harder." "Could I?" I sat down across from him. "What would you have done if I'd shown you that evidence 2 weeks ago? Would you have believed me? Or would you have accused me of hiring investigators to destroy your marriage because I was jealous?" Felix was quiet because we both knew the answer. "The FBI agent who interviewed me," he said finally, "she told me that Raya has been doing this for at least 5 years. Multiple victims across multiple states. They think she stole over $2 million from the men she targeted before me." "I know. And you knew that too?" "Yes." "Jesus, Mom." He looked up at me with eyes full of pain. "Do you know what it feels like to find out that your entire marriage was a lie? That the woman you thought loved you was just calculating how much you were worth?" My heart broke for him. "No, Felix, I don't know what that feels like. But I know what it feels like to watch your child being destroyed by someone who pretends to love them." She seemed so perfect, so understanding about my childhood, about our relationship. She made me feel like someone finally got it, you know? Like someone finally understood why I was angry with you. That's what people like Raya do. They find your wounds and make you think they're the medicine. Felix stood up and walked to my window, staring out at the city below. "She's pregnant, Mom." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "She told me last week. Said she wanted to wait until after dinner with you to announce it. Said she wanted us to be a united family before bringing a baby into the world." His laugh was hollow. Even that was probably a lie. I felt cold all over. A baby would have been the ultimate leverage, the one thing that would have tied Felix to Raya permanently, regardless of what he discovered about her past. "The FBI will want to verify that," I said carefully. "If she's lying about the pregnancy. And if she's not? If there really is a baby?" I didn't have an answer for that. The thought of my grandchild being born to a woman like Raya was almost unbearable. "We'll figure it out," I said, "one step at a time." Felix turned back to me, his expression hardening. "Will we? Because I'm starting to wonder if I can trust anyone anymore. You lied to me my entire life about who you were. Raya lied to me about who she was. How am I supposed to know what's real? You start by asking yourself who benefits from the lies," I said. I lied to protect you from gold diggers and fortune hunters. Raya lied to exploit you. Intent matters, Felix. Does it? Because either way, I feel like I don't know my own life. I stood up and walked over to him. Then let me tell you your life. Let me tell you the truth I should have told you years ago. For the next 2 hours, I told him everything. About his father's debts, and the men who'd come looking for money after the funeral. About the nights I'd worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat while putting myself through real estate courses. About the threats from his father's family, who'd tried to claim he wasn't really their blood, and therefore deserved nothing from the estate. I told him about the trust fund I'd established that would make him independently wealthy on his 40th birthday, about the scholarship foundations I'd created in his name, about the apartment building I'd bought across from his elementary school so I could watch him during recess from my office window when I couldn't be there in person. You were watching me? He asked, his voice small. Every day I could manage it. I saw you score your first goal in soccer. I saw you fall off your bike and get back up. I saw you defend that kid who was being bullied by the older boys. Tears were streaming down my face now. I was there, Felix. Maybe not in the way you needed me to be, but I was always watching, always protecting, always loving you. Felix was crying too. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Because I wanted you to be proud of your own accomplishments. I wanted you to know that you were loved for who you were, not what you could inherit. And because I was terrified that if you knew about the money, you'd attract people like Raya. People like Raya found me anyway. Yes, but at least now we know who she really is. My phone rang, interrupting us. It was Agent Chen. Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to update you on the situation. We've arrested Dr. Kellerman as well. She's been providing fraudulent competency evaluations for a fee, and we've confirmed that Raya Novak is not pregnant. The test she showed your son was purchased online. I closed my eyes in relief. Thank you for letting me know. There's something else. Ms. Novak is claiming that you orchestrated this entire situation to frame her. She says you threatened her and coerced her into the conversation we recorded. Do you believe her? Not for a second. But I wanted you to know she's not going quietly. After I hung up, Felix looked at me with a strange expression. She's still lying. Even now. Even caught red-handed, she's still lying. It's what she does. It's who she is. How did you know? How did you see through her when I couldn't? I thought about that for a moment. Because I've spent 30 years learning to recognize threats to my family. Because I've made it my business to study people who would hurt the people I love. And because sometimes being a mother means being suspicious of everyone who claims to love your child. Felix was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm going to need therapy. To figure out how to trust people again, how to trust myself. That's smart. And I want to know everything about your business. Everything about our family's finances. No more secrets. Agreed. And I want to work for you. Really work. Not just some made-up job. I want to learn how you built this empire. How you protected it. How you protected me. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. And saw something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Curiosity. Determination. The spark of intelligence that Raya had been systematically dimming. Are you sure? It's not easy work. Building something real. Protecting something valuable. It requires sacrifice. I'm sure. He paused. And Mom? I'm sorry. For the things I said. For not trusting you. For bringing her into our lives. You don't need to apologize for being human, Felix. For wanting love. For believing in someone who seemed to offer it. That's not a flaw in your character. It's proof that you have a good heart. Even after everything she did, part of me still. I mean, I thought I loved her. You loved who you thought she was. That person was never real, but your feelings were. Grieving that isn't weakness. 6 months later, Felix and I sat in my office, our office now, reviewing quarterly reports. He'd thrown himself into learning the business with the same intensity he'd once applied to winning Raya's approval. But now that energy was building something real, something lasting. The Portland development is ahead of schedule, he reported. And the Sustainable Housing Initiative is attracting investors faster than we projected. Good. What about the scholarship program? Fully funded for the next decade. We've already awarded grants to over 200 students. I watched him work. This son I'd thought I'd lost, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace. The empire I'd built had always been about providing for Felix's future. Now it was about building that future together. Felix, I said, I want you to know something. Everything I did, every choice I made, even the mistakes, it was all worth it to get to this moment. He looked up from his reports and smiled. I know, Mom. And for the first time in my life, I really understand what that means. Raya had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Dr. Kellerman had lost her license and was facing her own charges. Felix had gotten his marriage annulled rather than divorced, legally erasing the relationship that had never been real to begin with. But more than that, we'd found our way back to each other. Not as the mother and son we'd been, wounded and distant and full of misunderstanding, but as the family we were meant to be. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone hate you until they're ready to understand. Sometimes protecting the people you care about means being willing to be the villain in their story. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they eventually realize that the villain was actually the hero all along. What's next? Felix asked, gathering up his reports. I looked out the window at the city sprawling below us, at the empire we were building together, at the future that was finally, truly ours. Everything, I said. We build everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.